So we have gathered here today to issue a letter signed by over 150 student, faith, labor, political, business, and environmental groups from across the state, along with a petition signed by over 2,000 New Yorkers, addressed to legislative leadership and Governor Andrew Cuomo, encouraging him to eliminate unnecessary fossil fuel subsidies from the 2021-2022 state budget. As the previous year has shown, even during the midst of one of the worst public health crises of the last 100 years, the climate crisis has continued to rage and continued to damage our state and harm millions of New Yorkers across the state, but also millions across the world. So as we go into yet another year, we must continue the fight against the ongoing climate crisis. And one immediate action that our state can take in the upcoming year is to eliminate unnecessary fossil fuel subsidies from the state budget. So without further ado, I will hand it over to our first speaker, Marco Volpita, who serves as the co-director of government affairs for the New York Youth Climate Leaders and is a current freshman at Millbury College. Marco?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Marco Volpita. I'm 18 years old, and I've been a resident of New York for most of my life. During the time I've lived in the state, New York has given the fossil fuel industry approximately $17.6 billion. The amount we spend on propping up an industry without a significant footprint in our state is unconscionable. With $1.6 billion annually, we could properly fund the MTA, expand coverage of Metro North, improve social services, rebuild our state's infrastructure, or simply give each resident of New York $80 each year. Some of these subsidies are necessary, in a state and a month where the cold can easily become deadly. Ensuring that heating oil is affordable for every New Yorker is the right thing to do. Some subsidies, however, aren't. Subsidizing oil production, for example, is both unnecessary in New York and expensive. To avoid harming average residents and phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, we must have a proper accounting of the subsidies that New York gives to these companies to avoid wasting money on companies that are in no position to survive a transition to a low carbon economy. But we must begin phasing out the subsidies that don't make sense as soon as possible. For my generation, this is very much a decision that will affect what our futures look like. Oil and gas wells operate as long as they're profitable. Money is the motive of the companies that own them. And removing direct subsidies will decrease the amount of fossil fuels that come out of the ground, pollute our atmosphere, and harm our communities. Using these dollars to encourage growth of renewable energy or to transition home heating and cooking from oil and gas to electric would be a much better use that prioritizes the environment that I and any children that I have will live in, as well as prioritizing the health of the communities that live around fossil fuel infrastructure. As a state, we need to make a decision about who we are, because money talks. Will we subsidize shareholders who have no stake in the future of our state? Or will we account for the taxpayer money that flows from Albany and keep those subsidies that help our most vulnerable neighbors while investing the money that we currently give to a dying industry into the programs and communities that need it the most? New York is well positioned to lead our country into a brighter, greener future, and it's high time we acted like it.
Thank you so much, Marco. Next, we'll be hearing from Jordan Dale. Jordan is a veteran of the divestment campaign, the successful divestment campaign, I might add, and his organizational affiliations are with Divest New York and 350 NJ Rockland. Jordan?
Thank you, Radesh, and thank you, Marco, and thank you to all of the youth leaders who are on this call and who are spearheading this effort. A few years back, the United Nations International Panel on Climate Change told us that we had until 2030 to dramatically change the way we live on this planet if we are to avoid a climate catastrophe. If that seemed a long way off then to some, consider that in a few days it will be 2021, and 2030 is now only 9 years away. Consider also that the IPCC tends to err on the conservative side. The progress of climate change has been consistently faster than expected or predicted. So while we need to deal with the scourge of COVID, which is immediate, the need to deal with climate change is also urgent. Indeed, one could argue it is more urgent. Because while COVID is killing thousands of people, and I don't speak lightly of this, I have lost family members to COVID, climate change, by comparison, poses a far greater threat, including unparalleled human suffering and perhaps even extinction. Are we doing everything we can and should be doing to avoid this calamity? Not by a long shot, not on a planetary basis, not on a national basis, and despite some recent progress with the CLCPA and fossil fuel divestment, not on a state basis. Many of the steps that need to be taken require money, and this is particularly daunting now when New York State faces a severe COVID budget crunch. But there is one climate measure that not only won't cost money, it will actually save money. Talk about a public policy no-brainer. Of course, that measure is the elimination of fossil fuel subsidies. To slow and hopefully reverse climate change, we need to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources. It therefore makes no sense for the state to be providing tax breaks that artificially prop up the fossil fuel industry and give it an unfair and unwise market advantage over wind, solar, and other renewables. By eliminating fossil fuel subsidies, New York can trim hundreds of millions of dollars from its budget and move us one step closer to sustainability and planetary survival. We urge the governor and the legislature to eliminate these subsidies in the 2021 budget for the benefit of all New Yorkers, including, and perhaps most important of all, those not yet born. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Really appreciate it. Next, we'll be hearing from Jana, who is a member of the New York Public Interest Research Group, or NYPIRG. Jana?
Hi, my name is Jana Berger, and I'm a student of SUNY New Paltz, and I've been a member of the NYPIRG chapter there for 3 years now. I'm happy to be here today alongside so many advocates calling for New York to end fossil fuel subsidies in the state's budget. Climate scientists say drastic action must be taken to cut carbon emissions by 2030 if we are to avoid total climate catastrophe. As a young person, my peers and I will see the worst consequences of the climate crisis in our lifetime. I live and go to school in the Hudson Region Valley. This is a region that will likely see more flooding and precipitation if nothing is done about the climate crisis. The Danskamer power plant near New Paltz in Newburgh, New York, is an example of a fossil fuel company that is causing these damaging climate effects. It does not make sense to continue to allocate government funds to the fossil fuel industry, an industry that has an expiration date which was signed by Governor Cuomo himself in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Even with the CLCPA enacted, New York continues to incentivize the fossil fuel industry through subsidies to the very industry that spent billions lying for decades about their role in causing the climate crisis. The fossil fuel industry, which is responsible for so much environmental degradation and human health issues, should not be government funded. New York State must end its subsidies to this damaging industry. It is especially imperative that New York State does it this year because of the budget shortfall that the state is facing with the pandemic. New York could save hundreds of millions of dollars by ending fossil fuel subsidies and put it to good use, such as helping struggling New Yorkers or towards mitigating the climate crisis. Everyday New Yorkers like me shouldn't be the ones paying for the climate crisis and New York's fiscal shortfall. It should be the polluters that pay. For New York to maintain its role as a climate leader, the governor and the legislature will end these subsidies in this state's budget, in this year's state's budget. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Next, we'll be hearing from Marisa Guerrero, who works at the Natural Resources Defense Council as an advocacy coordinator on their environmental justice and New York regional teams. At NRDC, she works to combat fossil fuel infrastructure and promote policies that advocate for healthy people and thriving communities. Marisa?
Thanks, Ritesh, for that introduction. My name is Marisa Guerrero. I work at the Natural Resources Defense Council. And as the other speakers have pointed out, climate change is an existential threat to our planet. not just for an undefined, unknown future, but for right now. Across New York, extreme weather events like Superstorm Sandy have devastated our communities. New York City's extensive coastline has been inundated by unprecedented flooding, and heat waves have pummeled neighborhoods like Harlem and Bedford-Stuyvesant. The impacts of climate change are real, and they're happening right now. Eliminating subsidies and tax breaks for the fossil fuel industry is the right thing to do for many reasons. Here are just three. First, fossil fuels are the leading driver of climate change. New York State has made some great strides in ending our addiction to these dirty fuels. State law requires us to get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and just this month, New York made the historic announcement to divest the Common Retirement Fund from fossil fuels. But New York's left hand doesn't know what its right hand is doing. Our state government is still handing out $1.6 billion to the fossil fuel industry every year. That's twice the entire budget of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. Second, at a time when our state budget has lost nearly $63 billion due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we should cut out needless government spending wherever we can. New York provides tax breaks, credits, refunds, and exemptions at all levels of the dangerous fossil fuel industry, from research to fuel production to the very operation of natural gas pipelines. We even subsidize airline fuel and cargo ship bunker fuel, two of the most carbon polluting fuels out there. Finally, living through climate disaster is not experienced equally. The brunt of environmental impacts is disproportionately felt by low-income communities and communities of color across our state, in places like the South Bronx and East Brooklyn. This is despite the fact that these communities are responsible for a smaller percentage of our greenhouse gas emissions and have fewer resources to recover from the health and financial devastation wrought by climate disaster. It is fundamentally unjust that those least responsible for climate change must shoulder a greater burden, while the very industry causing the destruction is literally paid to ruin the planet. It's now time for New York State to get a hold of its budget and stop giving handouts to the well-heeled fossil fuel industry. We don't have time or money to lose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marisa. Next, we'll be hearing from Merton Simpson, who serves as an Albany County legislator and the co-chair of the Sheridan Hollow Alliance for Renewable Energy, or SHARE. Merton, a longtime Albany activist, has been a leader in the climate movement in Albany. He led the successful campaign to stop a proposed fracked gas power plant in the environmental justice neighborhood of Sheridan Hollow, just blocks away from the New York State Capitol. Merton?
Good day. It's a very critical time in history that we're in now, and we don't know how close we are to the tipping point. I happen to live in an environmental justice community of Sheridan Hollow, and I also represent this community. For over 100 years, this environmental justice community of Sheridan Hollow has been subjected to extreme pollution from oil, coal, trash, and now natural gas. This burden that was placed on our community for the benefit of the politicians in the Capitol has to be accounted for. New York State needs to be a model for sustainability, and we need to have the transparency so that we can identify those elements that are absolutely necessary and those that are not. For example, the E37 pipeline in Bethlehem has a present moratorium, but they could easily go back. You know, in this era of alternative facts where people conflate Wall Street with the actual economy, we can't allow us to waste precious dollars that should be going for sustainability for the continually feeding of the profits of the fossil fuel industry. I'm really buoyed by the fact that we have the kind of leadership that's represented on this particular conference, because the young people are the ones that are going to show us the way out of this. The present condition we find ourselves in shows that our generation has really not lived up to our responsibility. And so I'm happy to be a part of this major initiative to stop funding death and to use those resources to deal with the sustainability that will give us a planet that we can leave our children. Geothermal energy, as opposed to natural gas, which is proposed as some kind of a bridge fuel, ignores the really short-term impact of methane, which is a major component of natural gas. So we're dangerously close to the tipping point. We're not doing everything that we could do, and it's not clear that even if we took our best efforts, we would be able to sustain ourselves. So we really have to insist, for the benefit of future generations, that we stop digging the hole and start building and climbing our way back to a sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll be hearing from New York State Senator Liz Krueger, who represents the 28th District based in Manhattan and serves as a chair of the Senate Finance Committee and is also the lead sponsor of S2649C, which is the bill to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies in New York State. Senator Krueger, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you so much. And don't write that bill number down, because as of January 1st, it will be reintroduced with a new bill number for the new session. So nothing is changing about the bill. It had passed the Senate this year, but did not make it through the Assembly. So we're starting again with the new session, January 4th or 5th, and it will be reintroduced with a new number in both houses. I just want to start out by thanking all of you in the environmental activism movement for the incredible work you've been doing. We just finished up a multi-year phenomenal effort to get the New York State pension funds to agree to voluntarily remove fossil fuels from the portfolio, and even to go further than our original bill did, to reach a zero carbon footprint in New York State investments by the year 2040, with all the heavy lifting being done on the front end. So we had an amazing victory, and nothing follows a victory like moving towards the next victory. So I am delighted to also be the sponsor of the bill that you are pushing today. And I don't even need to say anything. You all said it so well. You so articulated the problem and the solution. I will just point out, I've been carrying this bill in a different format for years, because I've been carrying a bill that says we should reevaluate all of New York State's tax exemptions and credits on an ongoing basis and reevaluate whether they still have a justified reason to exist in the year 2021 or 22 or 23. That's because, unlike the New York State budget, which is a one-year budget, and all revenues get redecided every year, and all expenditures get redecided every year, once something sneaks itself into our tax code as an exemption or credit, it seems to just be there forever, with no obligation for anyone ever to look for it again. So you can actually find tax credits and exemptions that were written into the tax code 30, 40, 50 years ago, have more than quadrupled in the cost of the state of New York over that time, when no one's even asked the question, why? The only ones looking at it are the businesses who have figured out they can minimize their tax obligations if they redesign themselves to maximize taking the tax exemptions and credits. So the purpose of an exemption and credit is to incentivize certain behavior. Well, why are we incentivizing behavior, encouraging businesses to maximize their use of petroleum, oil, and gas products in the 21st century? As you've all pointed out, our job, our mission, our obligation is to decrease our dependence on these products as fast as possible. The clock is ticking. And yet, how can we here in New York State be spending $1.6 billion a year on petroleum-related product incentives? Like, it's stop, take a look, realize how dangerous this concept is. So I'm hoping we make progress by passing this bill this year. And then, even if it's not everybody's first item on their agenda, keep on your agenda. We have more to go because we spend about 30 billion a year in tax incentives and expenditures in New York State. And I'm the chair of the finance committee, which means every day people are begging me for money that I have to explain we don't have. And every day nowadays, people are begging me for new taxes on the wealthy, which I support, but are more complicated to implement. And yet, all of those asks added up don't add up to the $30 billion a year that we're simply handing out without asking any questions, figuring out why we're doing it, who's getting it, and whether it's a good idea in the year 2021, or whether there's better uses for that money. Because every time someone doesn't pay their taxes, even if legally allowed, somebody else is being asked for it over here. So it's just a fundamentally unfair model, and it's bad public policy. And when it comes to the environment, it's the worst public policy, encouraging people to use petroleum products because we're making it cheaper for them. So I thank you all for the hard work you've been doing. I want to do a special shout out to the youth climate crowd. You are doing amazing work. And you know what? You have to, because the generations before you screwed things up pretty badly. Sorry, I'm one of those generations. No, Merton is shaking his head also. I'm seeing a whole bunch of older heads shaking. So we screwed things up. And so you have to fix them. So I'm so thrilled that we have gotten such a talented and dedicated crowd of young environmental activists making us do what we need to do. So thank you for allowing me to participate with you all. Thank you.